Chapter 1, Introduction to Psychology. So what is psychology? Well, first let's look at the breakdown of the word. Psych means soul. Ology is a scientific study of. So when you combine it, you get psychology, the scientific study of the mind and behavior. Psychologists study everything about the human experience, from the basic workings of the human brain to consciousness, memory, language, reasoning, personality, and mental health. So when we look at the history of psychology, we have some main theories that we fall into. The psychological perspectives. So we have Structuralism by William Wundt. Structuralism is the understanding of the conscious experience through introspection. We have Functionalism by William James. Functionalism focuses on how mental activities help an organism adapt to its environment. We have Psychoanalytic theory by Sigmund Freud. Psychoanalytic theory focuses on the role of the unconscious in affecting conscious behavior. We have Gestalt psychology by Wertheimer, Koffka, and Kohler. Gestalt psychology focuses on humans as a whole rather than individual parts. We have Behaviorism by Pavlov, Watson, and Skinner. Behaviorism focuses on observing and controlling behavior. We have Humanism by Abraham Maslow, and Carl Rogers. Humanism emphasizes the potential for good that is innate to all humans. By the way, if you hear my dog barking, I'm sorry. So looking at Wilhelm Wundt, which is Structuralism. Wilhelm Wundt is credited as one of the founders of psychology. He created the very first laboratory for psychological research. Wundt emphasizes structuralism. He focuses on understanding the structure and characteristics of the mind through introspection. So introspection is a process by which someone examines their own conscious experience in an attempt to break it into the component parts. William James for Functionalism. William James, shown here in a self-portrait, was the first American psychologist. James drew from a functionality of cognitive processes, establishing functionalism. Functionalism emphasizes how mental activities contribute to basic environmental survival. Looking at Sigmund Freud, psychoanalytic theory. So he founded psychoanalytic theory, a perspective in which dominated clinical psychology for many decades. It studied hysteria and neurosis, theorized that many of his patients' problems arose from the unconscious mind, believed that one of the unconscious mind could be accessed was through dream analysis. Psychoanalytic theory focuses on the role of a person's unconscious and early childhood experiences. So something interesting about Freud is a lot of his theories kind of go off of a sexual basis. So that is something that you might hear a lot about in psychology and Freud, is the way he perceived the unconscious mind. Sigmund Freud was a highly influential figure in the history of psychology. One of his many books, A General Introduction to Psychoanalysis, shared his ideas about psychoanalytical therapy, and it was published in 1922. So Gestalt psychology, we have Kohler, Koffka, and Wertheimer. They were German psychologists who immigrated to the US to escape Nazi Germany. Gestalt means whole. It is based on the idea that although a sensory experience can be broken down into individual parts, how those parts relate to each other as a whole is often what the individual responds to perception. Ideas of Gestalt continue to influence research on sensation and perception. Ivan Pavlov for classical conditioning. Ivan Pavlov discovered the concept of classical conditioning. He studied conditioned reflexes in which an animal produced a reflex response to a stimulus, and over time was conditioned to produce a response to a different stimulus that the experimenter associated with the original stimulus. So looking at the picture on the bottom will explain this a lot better. In the first one, we have before conditioning. So the food response is saliva. The dog wants the food. Before conditioning, the bell response, no saliva. During conditioning, the bell plus the food equals the saliva. And then after conditioning, the bell responds in saliva. So the way this works is basically, at first, the bell has no impact on the dog. It's just a sound. He's like, whatever, who cares? But once you turn the bell and the introduction of the food to the dog over time, the dog will associate the sound of the bell with, hey, food is coming. So he starts to salivate because he wants the food. So that's kind of the understanding of how classical conditioning works. There's actually some really good videos on YouTube about this. If you want to look into it, you could just search up Ivan Pavlov, classical conditioning, dog study, and they'll have the videos there. For John B. Watson, we have behaviorism. John B. Watson is known as the father of behaviorism within psychology. He believed that objective analysis of the mind was impossible. Instead, he focused on observable behavior and ways to bring that behavior under control. Today, behaviorism is used in behavioral therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy. B.F. Skinner, operant conditioning. So Skinner concentrated on how behavior was affected by its consequences. He studied the principles of modifying behavior through reinforcement and punishment, which we saw as a major factors in driving behavior, so operant conditioning. So B.F. Skinner is famous for his research on operant conditioning. There's modified versions of the operant conditioning chamber or Skinner box that are still widely used in research settings today. So this one we're looking at right now with the picture of the rat is he does certain tasks and he gets food. So that's the reinforcement. There's also the punishment ones, which we are not going to look at on this slide. Abraham Maslow, Humanism. So Maslow proposed a hierarchy of human needs in motivating behavior. Maslow asserted that so long as basic needs necessary for survival were met, higher level needs would begin to motivate behavior. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a very popular thing within psychology and also within the counseling field. So when we look at the very, very bottom, that's where we start. The psychological, the food, water, shelter, and warmth. Those are our basic needs. Once those are met, then we motivate behavior to security. So we have safety, employment, assets. Then we have social, family, friendships, intimacy, belonging. Then esteem, self-worth, accomplishment, and confidence. And then the very top, self-actualization, the inner fulfillment. So that's the very top of the needs. And within the theory, they say that not many people, if anybody, ever gets there. So that's an interesting thing about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have Carl Rogers' Humanism. Carl Rogers developed a client-centered therapy method that has been influential in clinical settings. Client-centered therapy involves the patient taking a lead role in the therapy sessions. Roger believed that therapists need unconditional positive regard, genuineness, and empathy. The Cognitive Revolution. By the 1950s, new disciplinary perspectives in linguistics, neuroscience, and computer science were emerging. The mind became the new focus of scientific inquiry. So Noam Chomsky was very influential in beginning the cognitive revolution. He believed psychology needed to incorporate mental functioning into its focus in order to fully understand human behavior. So in 2010, there was a mural created in honor of him, put up in Pennsylvania. This is the picture of him right there. We have contemporary psychology. So there's different branches of psychology. So we have biopsychology and evolutionary psychology, sensation and perception, cognitive psychology, developmental psychology, personality psychology, social psychology, health psychology, industrial organizational psychology, sports and exercise psychology, clinical psychology, and forensic psychology. So looking at biopsychology. Biological psychologists study how the structure and function of the nervous system generate behavior. Research can include sensory and motor systems, sleep, drug use and abuse, ingestive behavior, reproductive behavior, neurodevelopment, plasticity of the nervous system, biological correlations of psychological disorders. So it very much studies the body and how it affects behavior. Sensation and perception. This area of study focuses on both psychological aspects of sensory systems and the psychological experience of sensory information. Sensation is the sensory information, sight, sounds, touch, smell. Perception is the experience of the world, which is influenced by where we focus our attention, our previous experience, and our cultural background. So, looking at the image, when you look at this image, you may see a duck or a rabbit. The sensory information remains the same, but your perception can vary dramatically. So the way you look at it gives a different perception of it. Cognitive psychology. Branch of psychology that focuses on cognition and thoughts and their relation to our experiences and our actions. So attention, problem solving, language, and memory. Developmental psychology. Developmental psychology studies the physical and mental attributes of aging and maturation. This can include various skills that are acquired throughout growth. So there's moral reasoning, cognitive skills, and social skills. James Paget is famous for his theoretical regarding changes in cognitive ability that occur as we move from infancy to adulthood. Personality psychology focuses on behaviors and thought patterns that are unique to each individual. Studies in this field include conscious and unconscious thinking and identifying personality traits. There's the 5-factor model. Each of the dimensions of the 5-factor model is shown within the figure to the right. The provided description would describe someone who scored highly on that given dimension. Someone with a lower score is given a dimension could be described in the opposite terms. So, looking at the traits, we have O for openness, so imagination, feelings, actions, ideas. We have C for conscientiousness, so competence, self-discipline, thoughtfulness, goal-driven. E for extroversion, so this is sociability, assertiveness, emotional expression. A for agreeableness, cooperative, trustworthy, and good in nature. And then N for neuroticism, tendency towards unstable emotions. Looking at the lower score for O, we have practical, conventional, prefers routine. The high score is curious, wide range of interests, independent. Low score for C is impulsive, careless, disorganized. High score for C is hardworking, dependable, organized. Low score for E is quiet, reserved, withdrawn. High score for E is outgoing, warm, seeking adventure. Low score for A is critical, uncooperative, suspicious. High score for A is helpful, trusting, empathetic. Low score for N is calm, even-tempered, secure. High score for N is anxious, unhappy, prone to negative emotions. So low and high score are opposites. Social psychology, how individuals interact and relate with others and how such interactions can affect behavior. So this is prejudice, attraction, interpersonal conflicts, and obedience. So looking at the figure on the left-hand side, this is from Stanley Milgram. Stanley Milgram's research demonstrated just how far people will go in obeying orders from an authority figure. This advertisement was used to recruit subjects for his research. So this was, persons needed for a study of memory will pay you $4 for 1 hour of your time. We have health psychology. This is a branch that focuses on how individual health is directly related or affected by biological, psychological, and social cultural influences. The biopsychosocial model suggests that health illness is determined by an interaction of these 3 factors, which are biological, social, and psychological. Clinical psychology. This focuses on diagnosis and treatment of psychological disorders and problematic patterns of behavior. The study involves clinical therapy and counseling. So cognitive behavioral therapists take cognitive processes and behaviors into account when providing psychotherapy. This is one of several strategies that may be used by practicing clinical psychologists. So we look at the 3 things: thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. And then we have the last 3, industrial organizational, which is a branch that applies to psychological theories, principles, and research to industrial and organizational settings. This involves issues related to personal management, organizational structure, and workplace environment. Next, we have sports and exercise psychology. This focuses on psychological aspects regarding sports and physical performance. Study includes motivation, performance-related anxiety, and general mental well-being. Then we have forensic psychology. This is a branch of psychology dealing with justice system. Tasks of forensic psychologists include assessment of individuals' mental competency to stand in trial, sentencing and treatment suggestions, and advisement regarding eyewitness testimonies. This field of psychology requires a strong understanding of the legal system. So some careers in psychology. Most careers in psychology require a PhD or a master's degree. A few career options are teaching, research, clinical psychologist, counseling psychologist, social worker, corporate and marketing jobs. Doctoral degrees are generally conferred in formal ceremonies involving special attire and rites. Employment in different sectors. So this is specifically looking at PhD in psychology, has a range of employment options. So we have 26% at university, 25% hospital or health service, 16% in government VA medical center, 10% in business or nonprofit, 8% in other educational institutions, 6% in medical school, and then 6% in independent practice. So this is going to be it for our first chapter. Thank you for your time, and goodbye.